Hello and welcome to Dropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're doing something slightly different because we're all under pandemic lockdown situation. We're doing it on our phones. I've got a microphone on my end. José's got a microphone on his end. We're going to try and combine it afterwards. So here we go. But we're doing this under lockdown conditions. How are you? How are you doing in the lockdown?
I'm all right. I got a message from the NHS today saying stay home. So
yeah.
Did you get one?
Not from the NHS, but this is the day that this morning Boris Johnson put out like an actual order, I think, for the first time saying you need to stay home. I still need to go to work.
Yes.
Because we're part of the supply chain, but everyone else is really properly staying in now, I think. And
yes.
The film I decided we should start off this new podcast regime with is Contagion.
Very appropriate. I was a bit iffy about it, actually, to be honest, because, I thought, seems so obvious.
Yeah.
But actually, having watched the film, there are very good reasons to see it.
Had you seen it before?
No, I thought I had, but actually, because I really like the director, but it's Soderbergh, but it was so off-putting, right? I thought it was going to be one of those all-star cast things, and it's going to be misery heaped upon misery, and I'd already seen the previous ones, because, there'd been a whole host of them. I remember one with Dustin Hoffman and so on, and, they're all very worthy and they're all not very good. But I thought this was very, very good.
Well, can I first say that, although it was my idea to start off with Contagion, because you've got a few films in mind as well and whatever, I said let's start with Contagion. It was a horrible idea. The first half of the film is terrifying, and I had a terrible time.
Well, you see, I thought it was wonderful.
It is. I mean, it's very effective, but I didn't realise it would be as terrifying as it is,
Yeah, well, it's particularly resonant now.
Well, yes.
Because actually we seem to be living through what the film is about. I mean, uncanny, in all kinds of ways, from the way that the film focuses on the touching of hands or the touching of surfaces, on the masks, on the social distancing. It is almost exactly what we're hearing, isn't it?
It's interesting. Like, in broad strokes, I think it is, but there are some really interesting differences between what the film shows. The film's from 2011, and it builds on kind of SARS and swine flu and bird flu and that kind of thing. Obviously, it's long before COVID-19. There are some really interesting differences between some things that the film shows and the way in which we're experiencing this pandemic now, I think. We see an awful lot of, essentially, competence in the film. There's an awful lot of confidence. The government is generally competent. There are certain degrees of individual kind of selfishness which are interesting, like the thing about the Lawrence Fishburne character, who, for the most part, is a really steady hand. He tells his wife, before everyone else, that there's a lockdown coming and you need to get out of town.
His fiancée.
Sorry, his fiancée. But, he tells her ahead of time. You have the Eli Gould character, who is told, he's a scientist who's working on trying to get a vaccine, and he's told, destroy all your samples, we can't risk this getting out, and he refuses to, and he ends up making a breakthrough that helps him develop a vaccine.
That's the Elliot Gould, yeah?
Yeah, did I say Elliot Gould?
The Elliot Gould character.
And it's not to say that people aren't being competent in this, in what's happening at the moment, but, we don't have a situation in the film like Trump and Boris Johnson sort of having these advisors around and basically denying things, lying, this kind of thing. You have the Chinese in the film where the virus originates, lying, but not the Americans. The Americans are pretty much stand up and they get it done.
I know, and they've been the worst actually at the moment. So in that sense of security in the government and of competence and of a government doing the right thing largely is certainly different than the times that we're living in. But all the other things are uncannily similar. Yeah, the shopping for food, the food shortages.
Yeah.
The way that it spreads, how it spreads. I mean, it is kind of prescient. Yeah. And really useful, I think, to see at the moment.
Useful.
Yes, because it really brings home, how just touching something and somebody else touching it can present a risk, and the camera sometimes. Somebody is on the bus and they just happen to touch, the pole in the bus with their hand, and the camera stays with it for a second, like underlining. Somebody else is going to touch that.
Yeah, that's right. It lingers on it, which is
So-
very, very effective. And there's an interesting thing going on, which I think is what we're feeling today as well, which is that, like, when I go to the shop, I go to Tesco and I see people there, and the hours have changed, and so it's kind of busier, and everyone's going after the toilet paper and all this sort of thing. There's I'm caught in two minds, because I have to trust everyone to do the right thing. We are genuinely all in this together. So we have to trust everyone to social distance and that kind of thing. But at the same time, it also means not trusting anybody, because anyone could have it. So there's a weird thing going on, and I think the film evokes that as well.
Yes, it does. At the end, when they are in the airport waiting in line, and that old man drops his ticket, and this very polite Chinese man picks it up for him, and gives it to him, and they shake hands. You're already going, no! So, I mean, that's even just kind of, very nice people kind of unwittingly putting everyone in danger just through forgetting, right?
Yeah.
So that sense of unease, the film does very well. And I think it's partly what we're living at the moment as well. Like, so I've been self-isolating, and I'm going bananas, and I've got so much to do, and I just can't concentrate on anything. So, I am still working. We had meetings today, through Zoom and things like that. But I just, every time I try to just read a book or see a film all the way through without stopping, I've been finding it very difficult. And it's just that edginess, that not knowing, right?
Yeah.
Kind of. I haven't hoarded any food or anything because, I have a big cupboard. And so I think, well, I can last a long time. But actually, kind of then you're thinking, should I go out? Should I get more food? Like, because actually some things you are running out of, like milk and eggs and kind of.
Yeah.
But you need milk and it's that kind of edginess, unease that I think the film captures very well, and it's quite brutal with actually, because spoilers.
Oh yeah.
It's an old film. Two of the biggest stars in the film die, right? And I think the deaths are handled very well, actually. Yeah, the Gwyneth Paltrow character and the Kate Winslet character, all in a very different ways. So I think the film actually, because I've now seen it twice. I saw it a few days ago, and then kind of when we agreed to do the podcast today, I thought I better see it again because,
Oh right, okay.
I can't remember. I could remember some things, but I wanted to be able to kind of, speak on it more articulately, really. And I was very surprised by what a good film it is,
Yeah.
like kind of, yes, I think, the shots, where the camera's placed, like there's this very interesting thing that caught my eye when Kate Winslet arrives in the airport, right, to kind of help set up, partly the science, partly how to deal with the problem. And the camera films her through a row of people, right? So actually you get the sense of urgency and or the bit where they take up that warehouse, as a hospital, right? And the way the camera makes you aware of, the urgency of it, the vastness of the space, because the camera keeps moving through the space, right? And then the government officials come in to say, who's going to pay for this, right?
Yeah.
So again, that tension between kind of lives and commerce, the film captures that very well as well, I think.
I did find something simplistic about aspects of that, though. So, that government official who you mentioned, she comes in and she says, is this coming out of your pocket or the taxpayers or whatever her particular line is? She's a very clear kind of villain, and it's also a very American way of having that villain. It's the government, the government bureaucracy person. He just cares about the money. Meanwhile, everyone else is kind of trying to do the right thing and they're really working hard. There was something quite simplistic about that. There was also something very simplistic about the blogger character, played by Jude Law, who he's Australian, and I think he's kind of based on the WikiLeaks guy, what's his name? Julian Assange, to some degree. Like a crazy person on the blogs going, this, that and the other. He talked about, I can't remember what the word is, but it's some...
He's a conspiracy theorist.
He's a conspiracy theorist, and he talks about a herbal thing, basically a homeopathic cure that says, well, if you just take this, forsythia, we just take this, then everything will be all right, and people are kind of believing him. But it's a very... I remember the same thing in The Newsroom, the Aaron Sorkin TV show, where the whole first season of that was about new media and the blogosphere, and basically it was about a real distrust of it, and it seemed like a real kind of boomer attitude, that like nothing these people do can possibly be right because we have the weight of sort of money and that kind of thing behind us, and they don't, and they just don't know what they're doing. And that's kind of what he's got going on.
No, well, I found it very resonant, and also kind of very true to life. I mean, I remember when the AIDS pandemic first started, and there was like, particularly for people, the people didn't know what was going on. There were all these quack theories. There were all these kind of experts suggesting different things because no one knew the answer. I mean, people were on herbal remedies. Right, and people swore by herbal remedies before they died. Right, like so that sense of not getting information, of kind of the cynicism with which people greeted everything that came from the government.
Oh, I do understand that.
Conspiracy theories.
I do understand that, and it's not to say that like I think that this guy has the right idea or that he wouldn't exist. And it's nothing like that at all. But I think it's very simplistically boiled down into this one character. For instance, basically, in today's world, he would probably be in Trump's cabinet. Like that's... Well,
exactly.
That's kind of...
But actually, if you were to do it now, I think the film is actually more subtle and complex than what we're seeing playing itself out in the US. I mean, if you were to make a film now about the way it's playing out in the US, you would have to make it half farce, half tragedy. I mean... Yeah.
But that would be kind of more true to life. I think what no one would have seen coming, or what didn't make it into Contagion, is the idea that so many people just refuse to believe this thing's happening. So you have the Generation Z people going out to do spring break. They're going out to parties. They don't believe any of what they're saying. Well, if I get coronavirus, then I get coronavirus. So what? And not kind of caring or believing in the herd mentality and that kind of thing. That's not something that shows up in the film at all. Like there is just kind of a general widespread paranoia, as there should be, but none of this kind of denial, which I think would be more true to life. And well, you would see it today. It is more true to life today. That people are kind of denying it, not believing it. I think that's whereas, like I say, in the film, it is just boiled down into this Julian Assange sort of type, who kind of distrusts everyone and also is out to make money for himself, because he's flogging. He's made money off his non-cure. I do find that very simplistic. It's not to say that it's like not true to life, but it just compartmentalizes a whole section of kind of how people think and behave. I think in a panic.
I liked it though. I liked it well because first of all, Jude Law is very good.
Yeah.
Second of all, he's kind of visualized his performance, right? So he's given himself a crooked tooth and a gap, so that every time he smiles, there's something off. There's something ugly.
Well, that's a classic villain thing, isn't it? The facial disfigurement.
Well, no, but then Soderbergh films him with that kind of spacesuit thing, amongst all the garbage or empty streets, or I think it's very powerful. Actually, I think So I agree that maybe conceptually it might not be as complex as it could be, though, you have to also think about all that the film does, right? Because it's true that each character is representing something whilst also being a character. So I think maybe the Jude Law character is the one who is less of a character and more of a point in an argument. But nonetheless, kind of the visuals really kind of convey something very powerful in relation to the rest of the film.
Yeah. What do you make of the attitude towards the Chinese, or the kind of the attitude towards the origin of the virus?
Well, I mean, I think it's appropriate. Yeah. It's not the first time, that something has originated from there. I don't know what I was reading that said there is a culture in China of newly rich people, right? Because, kind of billionaires in China haven't been billionaires forever. It was only since kind of the opening up of China to business, like about 20 years ago, that people really started making this amount of money. And of course, one of the things that people do is they try to impress their guests with, the most expensive and the most difficult to get foods, and of course, kind of different animals have, they're better for your health, or they make you more sexually powerful, or whatever, right? So it's not the first time, that this has happened, right? I think the whole film actually was based on, I forget whether it was the SARS or...
Yeah, I think SARS originated in China. I'm not sure about swine flu and bird flu. Didn't swine flu come from Mexico? I can't remember. Spanish flu came from America, I think.
Yeah. But anyway, in recent times, kind of, it's not the first pandemic to arise from that, and it is because of this mixture of exotic animals and food. And I think the film actually kind of conveys that very well at the end. So what I didn't like about it, because I think the film is moralistic, but actually not in the ways that I'm hearing from you. So what I hated about the film was the Gwyneth Paltrow character, having her have cheating on her husband in the first 2 minutes of the film, right? Because that already puts a moral judgment on the pandemic that is about to happen, whereas actually it shouldn't be.
I kind of thought that. I thought it sort of said, like, she got this because she was a bad person. It was a weird thing. Exactly. And it tied her being bad to kind of sexual desire. I mean, she shouldn't cheat on her husband, but it does put a kind of a prudish spin on it almost.
Exactly, right. So there's the combination of her being a bad woman because, she has sex outside of marriage, and then actually the Chinese restaurant, right? Because again, so I think the way that the virus is constructed with the bat eating the food, the pig eating, I think that's all very well. But then you get to the point where the chef wipes his hands on his apron and then shakes hands with her. Yeah, so I think that is very dodgy. Yeah, that does kind of, you particularize blame in a way that I'm a bit uncomfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that the Marion Cotillard character, her job is to trace the origin of the virus, and I think that's an important kind of, it's an important thing to do, and it's an important kind of part of the film. And her, what she ends up in a situation where she is kind of stonewalled by the Chinese who she's sort of trying to work with, and they end up kidnapping her so that their small village can get the vaccine when it arrives before anybody else.
Yes.
So like to a degree, you kind of think, oh, this is realistic. Like we heard about the Chinese at the start of this current pandemic, lying, keeping things undercover, and of course they weren't able to, and it's got out, and so there's a level of blame that's being apportioned to them. But then it goes so far to kind of give this one particular Chinese character an individual he acts out of selfishness and he acts out of panic, and you kind of understand it, but it's also essentially morally wrong, and you know that.
Yes. Though I think it's meant to be representative and not just of China, so to be fair to the film. Yeah, because actually we're told, one of the characters says, the reason why they give the placebo is because it's happening everywhere else. Yeah, so, so that's just one instance of that happening.
Yes,
So I kind of like that, actually. And I thought the film was marvelously structured. I thought it was wonderful that it begins day 2, and it leaves day 1 until the very end.
Yeah.
Right, and then kind of you go day 3, day 5. The film seems to kind of, start at this wonderful, exciting pace, actually.
Yeah, it does. And I love the way it spreads the story around its characters as well. It's a real ensemble piece, and a lot of these characters don't come together. The Matt Damon character is separate from the Lawrence Fishburne character, is separate from the Marion Cotillard character. These are all living in different kind of aspects of this panic as it develops. I think it handles that spread, if you like, very nicely, and keeps things... It's got a real sense of tempo and pacing. And it understands when to drop in and drop out of any character's story,
And actually, one of the interesting things about a film like this, in which each of the characters is an idea, right, and only secondarily a character, is how fantastic Matt Damon is. The bit in the hospital where he can't believe his wife is dead, and he raises his voice, it's just like kind of thrilling. Like you just have a physical response to that, right? Yeah, because he speaks much louder than everybody else, or much louder than he's spoken at any other time, and he gives this incredible charge. Yeah, like he can't believe he's not hearing what the doctors are saying because it's just so unimaginable. Yeah, that somebody so young and so on could be dead. Right? I thought he was wonderful with that.
There was one point with him that I really picked up on him not being as good as I would have wanted him to be. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it might be where he's in isolation, in quarantine in hospital, and his daughter comes, and by this point he's lost his wife and his son. And it might be that point, I can't remember, but he should have cried at one point. He should have been absolutely properly distraught, and instead they kind of try and play it as this numb shock thing, and actually what happens is when his daughter shows up, he just kind of gets into gear and he's just competent again and keeps his head on, and I just think it didn't come across as believable to me at all. I wanted him to be emotionally vulnerable then, and he wasn't. He seemed like nothing had affected him. Didn't like that.
Well, no, I disagree. I mean, I think he's got all this information coming from different areas, right? So because first his wife dies, then his child dies, right? Then, his daughter comes to see him but can't touch him, right? And I think you get a sense that he's processing all of this, and that he can't really. But then at the end of the film, when he's looking through the camera, and he sees, his dead wife, and he begins to break down. And then the daughter knocks, right? And so he's got to collect himself for the daughter. I thought that was fantastic. And it made sense of the whole performance.
No, you see, that's the thing that I disagree with. That's the thing that I didn't feel like. I would understand it if it was a kind of, there's so much kind of overload of information to him and kind of emotional experience that he just can't process it. But I don't get the sense that, I didn't get the sense that he was just kind of pushing through. I got the sense that he was really on top of things. And it's a different kind of performance that would have been. I just got... The way he acts in those moments is business as usual, as opposed to not being able to cope with things. That's the problem that I had with that. But it's a subtlety, and it's one moment, really. But I didn't like it. And I know what you mean about the ending. I think the ending is very nice for that reason. It does start to make sense. No, it is. The ending works very nicely, and it's an emotional whatever. But to be fair, I don't think it's a really emotionally switched on film. It's a bit cold. And it's sort of quite dry, I think.
You see, I mean, maybe I'm too involved with the film at the moment, but I didn't feel that way. I thought it was exciting to watch. I thought it was like visually kind of thrilling, actually. I love the color palette of the film. It reminds me of those. What's it called? The color process of the early 70s, the Eastman color.
Right.
Yeah, but new prints of that Eastman color, because it has that fantastic bright, almost neon yellows that they use, right? And then kind of, blue, like a kind of, a dark blue or a blue filter that they use throughout the film. And then you get these splotches of like red as well, like, the suits, so it has this amazing look. And it's really kind of carefully composed. Like a lot of those lines go off on diagonals, right? And it is kind of also to convey feeling, right? So that example that I gave with the Kate Winslet character, often you see people through windows, right? So when there's conversations happening in another room, you see the characters through yet another room, as kind of somebody's about to... so the sense of secrecy, lack of communication or miscommunication or the inability to know are really kind of conveyed through the compositions. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think it looks extremely beautiful and very evocative. But I there is a kind of emotional distance to pretty much everything, I think. And that's what I wanted out of the Matt Damon story that I didn't think I got, was an emotional component to how people are handling this. Because like I say, he's lost his son and wife. It should have hit him harder, I think.
What did you think of the Kate Winslet character?
Well, it sounds unfair to say sort of forgettable, but like she what did I think of her? She's good at her job, she takes it seriously, and then she can't help but get it and she dies. I mean, I kind of got the idea of it, but I didn't feel anything. I didn't really feel anything when she died.
I did. I thought that shot of her bagged up, with a plastic bag over her head. I thought that was so moving.
Yeah. I don't know. I think well, what I said right at the start was that the first half of this film scared the crap out of me because the first half of the film scared the crap out of me, and I think the reason that the second half didn't was because that's when it started to move into things that I didn't start to feel were recognisable in the real world. I think the first half really is. The sense of panic and not knowing where this is going and the growth really feel, like I say, recognisable right now. And then in the second half, it starts to move into this place where actually things are going to get resolved because they're working on this vaccine and they're making breakthroughs on that. That's where the Jude Law character starts to get more involved. And like I say, I see him as a real cipher, and I don't think he's that realistic. So I kind of don't. He's a little bit too fictional, if you like. That's not a bad way of putting it, but I just don't recognise him enough. There's not enough subtlety in that. And so as the film develops, it seems to just kind of move further and further away from what I would imagine is realistic, because because ultimately things get sorted out and they have a vaccine in place and it moves quite quickly. I don't think you actually get enough of a sense in that second half of the social effect of this, because it is so focused on its characters, and so many of its characters are involved in the government or the CDC and that kind of thing, and like they are right at the centre of this because they're the characters who are trying to figure out everything. That's what makes it interesting. You only get a very vague sense of social decay, how this actually affects people in a wider sense, and that's what would have made it feel more terrifying to me in that second half. I don't think you really get a feeling of like, oh, the world is starting to fall apart.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, there's only so much the film can do, but I did get that sense because, those shots of the airport hangar, wherever they said the hospital, right? And that beautiful moment where Kate Winslet tries to throw her blanket, to the guy who's dying next to her, right? And then kind of you see that the hangar is full of people. And then there are other moments where Matt Damon goes into the mall, and the mall is deserted, right? And that clothes shop, and again, Matt Damon going through these empty streets full of rubbish. I liked all of that. The highways, the carriageways being cut off, right, and kind of people forced to stay. I mean, because we don't know what's going to happen now, right? But it's very likely or possible that if this lasts another 135 days or whatever it lasts in the film, that kind of those measures will escalate in those ways. And I found it quite terrorizing. Also, the lottery aspect, when they do finally discover a vaccine, the lottery aspect of it and so on, right?
But that's actually turned into quite a nice moment, because what happens is Lawrence Fishburne gives his away to the son of the janitor in his place. So it turns into this moment where he can pay it forward, and actually it's a very positive thing. Whereas you imagine, there's another version of that where people are scrabbling over it. I mean, there is that scene where everyone's looking for forsythia, the homeopathic non-cure. And then the chemist says, we've only got 50 of these left, and everyone starts scrabbling for it starts a panic.
Yes.
So you get a sense of that, but I think it comes back to what you were saying about the characters being there to represent types and ideas. I think that's kind of what each scene does as well, and so that's kind of why I think it came across slightly cold to me, because it didn't feel... there is something emotionally detached, like the film is not emotionally in touch with its own story in a sense. It's kind of detached, and that's what I would have needed. I mean, that's such a kind of vague thing to say, like, how would you do that? But that's kind of what I felt emotionally distanced from actually the world in which it was happening once it got to a certain point. I think it needed to be messier.
I mean, I might have agreed with you had I seen this film in 2011, but kind of every moment spoke to me, actually, and many were recognizable, and a lot of them, it seemed very fact-based, right, and also kind of scary. So the film was working on different levels. It was calling on different emotions, really, partly recognizing a situation we're in, partly seeing how it could get so much worse. I mean, I think the only thing to me that the film didn't deal with, which seems to be such a large part of our contemporary discussion, is the economic after effects.
Mm.
Yeah, the fact that
Yeah.
what people are worried about is the economy, that people are willing to exchange, the lives of whole generations of people, yeah, in order for the economy to keep working. The conflict between big business and ordinary people that this particular kind of our version is throwing up. So the film doesn't deal with that,
Yeah.
which is interesting. I mean, maybe that wasn't fully understood or imagined. I mean, maybe, like you said, there was such a great trust on institutions and government that one couldn't foresee that those things would happen. Whereas, of course, the first thing that Trump did was he dismantled the Center for Disease Prevention, didn't he?
The pandemic response people. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The idea of trust in institutions is interesting because this was 3 years after the 2008 financial crash. So it's not like people were people had been more trusting of institutions before. I mean, if you think like 20 or 25 years ago, there was such a trust in sort of big business that you thought, oh, get all these big business people into the government because they know how to run it. If they know how to run a business, they can run a government. Like, the world is not like that anymore, and it wasn't like that at the time either. But it has changed since then. Like, we are now between 2011 and now. I think you pick up on something that's absolutely right. Like, the way in which people are responding to this economically, and the way in which there is just a much greater focus on the economics of it is really interesting. And I think it's, like I said, the thing about people not believing it widespread, it's unfair to criticise the film too much for not putting that in, because some things are just not imaginable. I don't think people you really would have imagined that there would be such a widespread just distrust in facts at this time. So it's not. So I'm not I don't want to be too harsh on the film in saying, well, it's a mistake, you never put that in. And I think the same thing is true of the economic effects, but as you say, what's happening now in the real world with the economic damage, with people losing their jobs, with this thing about we'll pay 80% of your wages. Now the government's finally got around to saying if you're furloughed, people who are self-employed are losing work, that kind of thing. People are really in trouble. If they put that in the film in some way, you'd have probably thought that is far too sci-fi at the time. Do you know what I mean?
It would have been unimaginable. I mean, I certainly would never have imagined a conservative government, a very right-wing conservative government, to have taken the measures that Boris Johnson and the Chancellor have taken recently. I mean, that to me, it is, as socialist as you can get, really.
Yeah.
Guaranteeing people's wages. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So I think that would have been I wouldn't have been able to imagine it, that's for sure. So, you can hardly blame the film. So, but let's move away from, because I think in a way we're discussing lacks, and, it's always very difficult to talk about films in terms of lacks. Like, you have to look at the film in terms of what it is, not what it coulda, shoulda, woulda, So, and I must say, I was like really pleasantly surprised. I think it's really very good. And some of the moments are just like we are living them now. It feels like a documentary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so I mean, ultimately, I think the reason to have watched this was the current situation, and to see, sort of what the difference is between what was imagined and that kind of thing. And so that's what we've talked about. And I think there are lots of things, like I say, that really the whole first half of the film, I think it captures a real sense of unease and panic and not knowing where things are going. And there are things that are so recognisable to what we're experiencing now that I thought, oh God, this is a horrible experience. I mean, it was a terrible. Seriously, it was. I started watching it. I thought, oh, this will be fun. I said to you, let's watch Contagion. It'll be hilarious.
I thought you'd seen it already. You see?
No, I hadn't. But I was like, well, everyone's talking about it now. It's number 7 on iTunes, and they're showing it on Thursday, as you found out on ITV. So like everyone's interested in it again. I thought, well, it's perfect time to watch it. A terrible idea. We should never have done this.
I like it. Well, what I wanted you to see, which is what we'll do next, is Bacurau, which is playing on Mubi.
Yeah.
So, and actually this will be a great opportunity to see more films like that, because, they are on video on demand. Kind of a lot of new releases are being put on, on Netflix, on Mubi, and so on. So, I think in a way it's probably I think in terms of our podcast, it might be a good thing, because it'll open up the range of films that we can see.
Yeah. bazillion films about. I mean, it does look actually quite interesting, Baccarat, so I'm looking forward to watching it. So we'll watch that over the next couple of days, and then I'll get you to watch Hook, and then I'll finally have that satisfied, and then we'll see some other stuff.
Yeah, we can take turns choosing. But now let's end this.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah. So, well, yeah, like I say, I think I'm glad that I watched it. I think there are some really interesting things. I think it's an amazing cast as well. We haven't said. I mean, it's one of those films where you kind of get the feeling, well, Steven Soderbergh has got so many friends, and they all just want to work with him, and they'll do anything. You know, it has that sense of a cast, and I think it handles the movement between its characters and the development of its story really well. It has a fantastic sense of pace, as I say. I did start to find it lacking later on, and I would have liked more sense of emotional connection to some of its characters. But I think it's a really interesting film and a really well made one, and in light of today, there's an awful lot to think about.
Yes, I just want to add, because I think there are a few actors that I hate more than Gwyneth Paltrow, and I want to single her out and Matt Damon for both being really great in this. Actually, I was really surprised.
She's hardly in it.
How wonderful. She is in it more than you think, because she dies right at the beginning, but then the film keeps going back to her. She is the anchor of the film. It's a kind of, it's an investigation into her that resolves the problem of the film until the very end, which is why I think the moralizing about her at the beginning is so problematic, because it begins and ends with her, and you flash back to her. Throughout the film, actually. So she is a central character.
Yeah. Well, I disagree with you on Matt Damon, but...
Right. Anyway, I think we both recommend that you see it. I think everybody will anyway.
It's having definitely a second wave right now.
Yeah. So if you see it and if you listen to the podcast, kind of let us know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, stay indoors. Stay indoors, stay safe. Don't go out, just stay in and listen to the podcast. That's my advice.
That's right. All right. Thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube to listen to us. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Cheerio. Bye-bye.